Now call the October 7th, 2024 board meeting to order. Ms. Harrison, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Representing Educational District 5 and Board Chair Erica Mitchell.
Present.
Representing Educational District 4 and Board Chair Jennifer McDonald.
Present.
Representing Educational District 1, Ms. Katie Howard.
Present.
Representing Educational District 2, Ms. Aretta Balden.
Present.
Representing Educational District 3, Dr. Ken Zeff.
Present.
Representing Educational District at Large, Seat 7, Mr. Alfred Chivy Brooks. Representing Educational District at Large, Seat 8, Ms. Cynthia Briscoe Brown.
Present.
Representing Educational District at Large, Seat 9, Ms. Jessica Johnson. I see she's present on Zoom. And Madam Chair, we have a quorum. Also, I would like to acknowledge our superintendent,
No.
Dr. Brian Johnson.
We didn't call Ishay.
I'm
You
sorry.
skipped Ishay.
Representing Educational District 6, Ms. Ishay Collins. She's not online as of yet. Madam Chair, we do have a quorum.
Thank you. Now we entertain a motion to approve September 3rd, 2024 meeting minutes.
So moved.
Motion moved by Board Member Briscoe Brown.
Second.
Second by Board Member Aretta Balden. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve October 7th, 2024 board meeting agenda?
So moved.
I have a
Second.
motion moved by Board Member Briscoe Brown, and it's been properly moved and second by Board Member Aretta Balden. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Dr. Johnson, would you please bring the work session items?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. We have 3 presentations today. Our first presentation is a board-requested presentation on the annual facilities capacity and utilization review that'll be presented by Mr. Dan Drake, who is the Senior Executive Director of Facility Services. Next, we'll have a presentation on our monthly financial update, which will be presented by Dr. Lisa Bracken. And then our last presentation will be focused on student outcome-focused governance, or SOFG, which is focused around Goal 1, which is literacy, and interim goals 1.1 and 1.2. So we are ready for the annual facilities report. Mr. Drake, if you'll come up, board requested presentation. And good night, because both of these presentations, the facility piece as well as the budget piece, are interconnected, so it's good that they are together. Mr. Drake?
Good afternoon, Board Member Chair, members of the board, and Superintendent Johnson. I'm here today to present our annual facilities capacity and utilization review. We will start today by providing a background of the annual review process that has taken place over the last 2 years. We'll then talk about some of the national and regional declining enrollment trends that we're seeing over the past decade. We'll then give you a sneak peek of this year's preliminary enrollment, and discuss how the new school size trigger that we are exploring could help address the budget shortfall, as well as upcoming SPLOST decisions needed the next year as we prepare for the next SPLOST. Starting with the end in mind, the key takeaways, as shown on the right, you will hear in this presentation. First off, that 43 of our 72 buildings are severely underutilized. Second, the annual report process will be pushed up to December board instead of the normal February process to provide more time for public engagement in early 2025. And third, we are strategically aligning this work with the other planning efforts related to budgets, strategic plan, and the next SPLOST. Before we get into the present and future decisions, let's provide a bit of background. Shown on the slide is our normal annual review process, which begins in October, where the official FTE counts are provided, our 5-year forecast is developed, and our capacity review is done in November and December, including principal feedback, which leads to the preliminary assessment or the annual report. That is completed in January and provided as an information item normally at the February board meeting. Again, this year we'll bring up to December. If redistricting or other processes are needed, the months of February through April are the periods of public engagements in which to vet these plans with our stakeholders. The superintendent's recommendation, if any, would then be brought to the board in May for first read and June for the final approval. For added background, this slide is actually a copy of the slide from the November 2022 board retreat where we introduced the utilization triggers. But more importantly, in the highlighted area in yellow on the bottom, we committed that we would not address any of the underutilized schools until the 24-25 school year. So this annual review report and subsequent stakeholder engagement will for the first time review the 43 underutilized schools. We committed to this delayed review 2 years ago to see if the COVID enrollment decline would rebound before making such decisions. Unfortunately, we have not seen such a rebound. This table has been provided as the key measure in the past 2 annual facilities reports, where the red and yellow at the top are overcapacity or approaching capacity schools with potential or annual potential action or annual monitoring. The green and blue categories are where we'd like our schools to be. That's the sweet zone that we'd like most of our schools to be in and stay in. The purple category is for the severely underutilized schools. As you can see at the bottom, we reiterated the same statement of no review or proposals into the 24-25 school year. And again, that statement was in the last 2 annual reports. As a historical context, prior to our first report, the Virginia Highlands Elementary redistricting started in the spring of 22 and rolled over to August of 2022 board approval and went into effect the fall of 2023. For the first annual report that was brought to the board in February 2023, we showed 3 schools in red: Midtown High School, Jackson High School, and Woodson Park. We explored rezoning proposals, but concluded the process with an address verification of Midtown High School that year, capacity review for those schools, and explored other innovative measures at these schools. For last year's report, in February 2024, the same 3 schools were in the red. For Midtown and Jackson High School, we decided to wait on redistricting since Midtown High School was forecast to peak in the 25-26 school year and to conduct an address verification at Jackson High School. Woodson Park's redistricting was approved in June of 2024 and provided a walk zone for the John Lewis Invictus Academy Middle School and addressed the overcrowding at Woodson Park. This redistricting will go into effect the fall of 2025. Before we dig into this year's facilities report, we want to provide some background on the national and regional declining enrollment trends. This slide provides the historic enrollment of all pre-K to 12th grade public school student enrollment in the United States since fall of 2012. The National Center for Educational Statistics also provides a forecast of students out to the fall of 2031, as shown in the brown line on the right. Enrollment was on a slight upward trend nationally coming into the pandemic, and then a sharp decline in enrollment, as shown in red, in the fall of 2020 after the pandemic, with a slight recovery over the past few years. But the NCES's forecast shows significant decline over the next 8 years. Looking at the public K-12 students in the state of Georgia, there was a flat enrollment from fall of 2016 into the pandemic. So you can see it flattened out over that period of time. After the pandemic, the statewide student enrollment declined by 33,000 students and a slight rebound over the past few years across the state. We see similar trends more locally with APS in Clayton County schools, with APS in the blue and Clayton County in the brown, losing approximately 1,100 and 2,000 students respectively in each district from the pandemic, as shown in red, and continued enrollment declines since then. Rounding out the neighboring larger districts, Cobb, DeKalb, and Fulton, each lost about 4,500, 4,800, and 33 students, respectively, during the pandemic, as shown in red, and no later recovery of this enrollment. And one thing to note about this, you can see that even some of these school districts before the pandemic were starting to lose enrollment. So the pandemic is contributing to these declines in enrollment, but so is the falling birth rate, which has fallen each year since 2005, as shown in the green line, the bottom line of the chart. We are seeing a reduction in kindergarten enrollment most years from these declines in birth rates. Now that we set the table for the past year's reports and declining enrollment trends, let's look at the sneak peek for this year's report. We are calling it a sneak peek since this is based on the September 10th enrollment, as shown on Infinite Campus, and does not reflect the certified enrollment count of last Tuesday's October 1st FTE count, which will be certified APS on October 22nd. Please note that individual school enrollments will vary from the sneak peek data and the official data in the forthcoming report. The enrollment in APS in the fall of 2010, which is the very far left, was 48,805, which is almost the same enrollment we are showing on September 10th of 48,647, if you look at the very far right of that top green line. Over this period, the enrollment peaked in fall of 2018 at just over 51,000 students. While the fall of 2010 and fall of 2024 enrollments are almost the same, as you can see in the blue line, which is the APS managed schools, there are 6,200 less APS students in APS managed schools, which has been gradually shifted to charter schools, which is the bottom orange line, over this time period. Diving in deeper to the preliminary 322 enrollment increase. So while we've seen some declines in the last few years, we are showing an actual 322 increase for Atlanta Public Schools for this year, as of the September 10th data. And we're seeing three categories of change. The three green clusters of Jackson, Midtown, and North Atlanta with a combined 579 student increase. The two pink clusters of Therrell and Washington with a combined 260 student decrease. And the other clusters in gray are relatively flat. The utilization triggers for this year's preliminary report, which are the same triggers that we've had for the last 2 years, shows 2 red schools of Jackson High School and Midtown High School, 4 yellow schools of King Middle School and Parkside Elementary School in the Jackson cluster, and Centennial Academy and North Atlanta High School. 23 of the 72 schools, this is the good news, 23 of the 72 schools are in the desirable green and blue categories, while unfortunately 43 of the 72 schools are severely underutilized, including every school in the South Atlanta cluster. So we see it says there's 7 schools, all 7 of them are. We can show the red, yellow, and purple schools on a map. On the left map, Jackson has 3 schools in red and yellow, the Jackson cluster. Midtown cluster has 2, and North Atlanta cluster has 1. On the right, the 43 purple severely underutilized schools are present in all clusters. We will show the details of each cluster, starting with Carver and ending with Washington, and go through each of these. Each cluster slide, as you're seeing on here, will show a table at the top left with all schools sorted from the low utilization schools at the top to higher utilization as you move down the table. Also provides a color-coded map of the cluster at the top right, and then pulls the line from the table and notates any changes from last year's report. So for Carver, as shown on this slide, 6 of the 8 schools are purple, which is 1 more than last year, where Slater Elementary was in blue last year. All elementary and middle schools in this cluster are purple. Douglas cluster. For the Douglas cluster, 6 of the 9 schools are in purple, which is 2 less than last year, as we had the 2 single-gender schools listed there. Also, Woodson Park went from red last year to the green this year. The Jackson cluster has both overcrowding and underutilization, with Jackson High School in red, Parkside Elementary and King Middle School in yellow, and Bamo, Benteen, and Dunbar in purple. Parkside shifted from green last year to yellow this year. 5 of the 7 schools in the Mays cluster are in purple. Similar to Jackson, both overcrowding and utilization in the Midtown cluster, with Springdale Park in purple, underutilized, Centennial in yellow, approaching capacity, and Midtown High School in red, over capacity. Please note that Morningside went from yellow last year to green this year. North Atlanta cluster has 5 facilities in purple, and North Atlanta High School in yellow, approaching capacity. As mentioned before, all schools in the South Atlanta cluster are purple, and only 1 school with a utilization greater than 50%, and that's Long Middle School. All the other ones are less than 50%. Farrell, 4 of the 6 schools are purple. And then finally in Washington, 4 out of the 5 schools are in purple. So for this year, we're exploring a school size metric that will look at the minimum capacity for each facility independent of the utilization. This metric is currently under review, and we believe it will be beneficial to the budget and SPLOST planning processes. First off, for the budget, the district is forecasting challenges over the next few fiscal years, and this school size metric could support the decisions for consolidating the smallest capacity schools as we look to right-size the district. For SPLOST 2027 on the right side, if approved by the voters, we would start the sales tax collections in July of 2027. Working backwards from that July 2027 date and working from the bottom of the chart, the bottom bullet, the vote could take place in November of 2026. The board will then approve the project, will need to approve the project list by April or June of 2026. And we would need the right size decisions about this time next year, about the fall of 2025. This right size decision could lead to strategic decisions on which schools will need renovations and other improvements. So with this significant need to review the 43 underutilized schools and potential right-size consolidation decisions, this year's annual report will be released as an information item at the December board instead of February. We still have the principal feedback process for capacity and enrollment projections, and we'll have a forecast out 5 years for all schools, all this completed for the December board meeting. While we have no specific details on the engagement process at this time, we are allowing 2 more months for the stakeholder process from January through April of 2025, with any needed board actions coming to the board for first read in May and final vote in June of 25. Any rezoning decisions from these board approvals would take effect in fall of 2026. We'll now open it up to any questions or comments.
Thank you for your presentation. Board members, do we have any questions? I will start down here with Board Member Briscoe Brown. I believe, are you, Board Member Alfred Shibley Brooks, you? Okay. All right, let's start with you.
Do we have, there you are. Sorry, I'm having trouble with my microphone here. It wants to flop over. Do we know how many of the students who are zoned to the underutilized clusters and the underutilized schools, who are zoned to those schools because of their residence address, do we know how many of them attend other APS schools? I know that the partners I think, are included in these numbers. It looks like they are. Is that correct? And is that true in all cases?
So to answer your question, as far as the APS managed schools, the partner schools are included in there.
Okay, so in this data that you've just given us, the partner
Partners,
schools,
yes,
but
but the charters are not.
but the charters are not. Do we know where our students in charter schools are zoned to attend? Because it would seem to me that that's an important part of making a strategic decision about a school.
Yes, we do, and it's actually one of the tables that we have in our annual report
Okay.
is the actual students that are, it's table 20 in the last report, and it looks like this.
Is it in the PowerPoint? Or?
No, I'm sorry, it's just in last year's annual report.
Got it.
We can get you a copy of that, but so that report tells you how many students in a K-5 or 6-8 or 9-12, how many students that are zoned for that area, whether they choose their school. Then it tells how many students go to a charter school or another APS school. And then what the folks that do that are called resident attendees, and then has the number of students that are actually coming in from other districts as well to make the full. So it's got both the ins and outs of all those students,
Okay.
of those schools, I'm sorry.
Okay. And just to be clear, I do think Centennial is included, even though it's a charter, because it has a zone.
Yes, I'm sorry, that was,
Okay.
all of the traditional charters are not, the conversion charter of Centennial is included
Right.
in this, with the partners.
It's always a little different.
Yes, yes, thank you.
And the second one is, I note from the map, the slide you did about over and under enrolled schools placed on a map. Let me see if I can figure out which one that was.
Slide 18.
That sounds about right. Yes, that one. Geographically, the North Atlanta cluster is by far the largest in terms of actual boundaries, but has a relatively smaller number of schools, and also, I think I'm right, has the largest enrollment. And this is not so much a question as just something I think we need to take into account, that we have, that in some of these over-enrolled clusters, we have fewer schools and more land area, which just means that there are more students actually zoned to the schools.
And I can confirm that North Atlanta does have the highest enrollment of all the clusters and has the most number of facilities at 12.
Has the most number of facilities?
Mm-hmm. It does.
Oh, you're counting you're counting the dual campus
Yes,
schools.
but not the underutilized, I'm sorry, the total number of facilities.
Total number of
Yes.
facilities, right. Yeah, okay. All right, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you so much for the presentation, and thank you, Board Member Briscoe Brown, for your inquiry. I also wanted to note, it is great that North Atlanta has higher utilization than many of our other areas, but it also has a smaller concentration of charter schools in its cluster as well. It's very important, and why I appreciate your inquiry, and I wanted to lean on the charter specifically. I do understand that there's going to be more data that we'll be receiving over time as we start to review our charters and partners, but I am curious if we are examining the size of our charters, the concentration of our charters, and the proximity to our traditional schools. And if we're able to make that information plain, as to Board Member Briscoe Brown's point, I think it's important as we start building our strategy as to how we right-size this district, that everything is in consideration, I think, at the same time. And I guess that's just a point of that I wanted to put out. My question, though, is, do we have suggestions for which schools, which elementary schools, which areas have the most feasibility for consolidation and where we might want to look first. I know there's been a lot of conversation about what should be the tempo, and obviously that's your decision what the what the tempo is going to be. But I would hope that we kind of look to come at this piece by piece as opposed to, you know, pushing everything off of the table and starting anew, which I think has kind of been a strategy in the past and hasn't bared out. And so we got to get something done here in the right way. So is there anything on the list that we kind of see as being most feasible?
I'll take a stab at that. So I think from a feasibility, what you've got tonight, a couple of things. I'm gonna level set here. I don't know what official school day this is for me. Kind of lost track, but we're dealing with two heavy topics tonight. First is a significant budget deficit, which will be next. And right now, I won't say first, second is a significant budget deficit. First, what we're dealing with right now is the right sizing, reimagination, really, of the district and how we leverage all of our resources, which are for and of community good. And we want to make sure that we're getting the highest and best usage out of all of our facilities, and concurrently ensuring that all of our students are getting an exceptional education. I think when we look at recommendations, Board Member Brooks, we want to be as thoughtful as possible, so in collaboration with the board and the community, so we don't, this is the kind of reset, level setting, thank you, Day 46, reset, level setting of the data, right? So there's a lot, this is a very dense report that I think does a few things. One, obviously gives some outlook on kind of national trends and what's happening from a student K-12 enrollment standpoint, and then zooms in on our district, and then zooms in a layer deeper by cluster, and then kind of lays out a timeline. The missing component in there, I think, is what your question centers around, like what does this mean, and what will the recommendations be? And I think that's a part of the conversation that we'll have to continue to engage in over the next several weeks and months. As Mr. Drake mentioned, the timeline is accelerated specifically for, not accelerated, it's really, I'm saying it in reverse. We've moved the timeline back so that we can elongate the amount of time that we have to engage with the public around any thoughts or recommendations or ideas. And I think to the point, we want to move some things down the road, but then also know that what we're up against right now is a pretty significant challenge, and so there, you know, we've got to think of this through pieces or phases, but then we've got to have a view of really what I have great energy around is having a view of an entire player plan, and so I don't want to, I can't speak to what all that looks like in Day 46, but I think it's really, we're in a good spot because of some of the work that's already been done to understand where we are from a facility standpoint so that we can work together to figure out how we move forward.
Yeah, I'm good. I heard not yet. And that's all right, and that's good. That's good.
And I think, I'm sure in the past there's been facilities retreats with the board, et cetera. And so I think, you know, this probably warrants, this is not something you can probably cover in a, 35-minute conversation, because these are heavy decisions. And and so it probably warrants a deeper conversation around facility. I do hope, as the board, we engage in this conversation, that it's not just a facility consolidation conversation. I think that would be a mistake. I think this is an opportunity for us to reimagine how we leverage our facilities for the good of the community, and I don't know what that looks like, right? But if there are opportunities to rethink and reset, I was meeting with our CTAE director today. I was at Adult Learning earlier today. I just think there's a lot of opportunities to think through how we use any potential excess facilities that we have for the betterment of, obviously, our district, but obviously our community really as a whole, and it probably warrants a much broader conversation than can be covered. And I'll be honest, in 46 days in, I'm not coming to tell this community 46 days in, here's what I'm recommending you consolidate. What I am saying is, we gotta do something. And we got to think through it together, and we're better together if we think through that, and not just on this dais, which you all are voters, I'm just a recommender, with the community. And so to be really abundantly clear, we've got a lot of work to do. Lisa will get into this, but there's a $250 million deficit that's staring us in the face by 2030. And a lot of that has to do with right sizing. And I think there'll be ongoing conversation around that. So it's not yet, but I think we need to go deeper into this and to look at what some options are and probably have some more conversation around it.
Is there a recommendation for like what portion of our schools, you know, in each category would put us in a healthy place? Like, do we at least have that kind of like the where we should be?
As far as the number of sites or schools or?
Number of schools, utilization, et cetera. Like, what's the sweet spot?
Yeah, so go back to that slide then, if you would, that shows just the baseline slide of averages that exist. And so I don't know if this is going to get at answering your question in regards to, you know what I'm talking about?
I am.
To whoever-
Yep, I was
okay.
going the wrong way.
And so it shows the kind of percentage. And let me give context, like these percentages look the same across most districts across the country. And it's generally speaking, you'll see these percentages within 5 percentage points or so be the same across communities when you look at health of a building. Usually that 80 to 90% is where you see most districts say, and I'm just going off prior experience, not even looking because I'm blind to see the slide. 80 to 90% is where you see healthy. Usually when you get to about 92 to 95% is when you're starting to worry about, okay, do we need to do something from a capacity standpoint? Now, let me say this with one caveat to the facility conversation I think you're speaking to a little bit. There's going to innately be have to be some conversation around schools that are above capacity. And so so you really got two conversations going on right now. You've got an operational conversation, continuity of operations that has to deal with, how do we operate on a day-to-day basis from the standpoint of facilities or schools that may be over capacity. That's an operational conversation. I think there's a broader strategic conversation that has to deal with kind of future forward, where we're going to be 5 years, 7 years. That's a heavier conversation. So to clarify and to go back, there are probably some things we've got to consider because of overcrowding in a spot or what have you. And then there are some broader stroke conversations that we need to have about how do we best use is what we're getting out of each facility its highest and best usage? And I don't know that answer in isolation, but I think it's a conversation that we should be having.
If you can.
Yeah, man, we can go back and forth all day. It's
Yeah, okay, no, okay. On this end? You want to just go down one? Okay, you're a listening mode, I love that.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Drake, and I want to build on Board Member Brooks' comment. I mean, the process here really matters. I know this is not a decision-making moment. We're not here. This is nothing's coming forward. We're on a journey that we've been on for a bit. But what I hear from, at least from my community, is there are some tough choices that need to be made, but it's only going to be successful in an atmosphere of trust, and we build trust through transparency. And so the more that these are hard decisions, and folks understand that these are hard decisions, and so the more that we can be just clear about this process. So can you tell me? So December, you come back with your 5-year projections, and then in the spring, what happens in the spring?
So as I said earlier, when we come to the report, the report will be a board information item in December. We'll be able to lay out the real trues, reds and yellows and purples. And then based on that, based on what we come out of this process, the time frame or the strategy, the community engagement strategy has not been decided at any means at this point. I would say in the next 30 to 60 days, we'd have a better explanation of what that process is going to be. But at this point, we don't have that process. We've just given the sneak peek, but we know there's going to be a process. And working with Travis Norvell's and our folks together, we'll be working on some type of process.
So let me bookend it then. So when you said that for the fall of '25, we have to have the SPLOST list done. Any changes that come out of the spring of '25 won't take place till fall of '26?
The SPLOST project list would need to be done May to June of '26. In order to get that May, June of '26, we would want to know any major strategic decisions or choices about a year from now. So like October of next year at this point, so that between October 25 and June of '26, we're fine tuning and figuring out if certain buildings are to be consolidated or offline. We will be able to, if there's certain additions or whatever is needed for all of this, we'll if we can get those decisions about October of next year, 1 year from now, we can then develop the best package of projects that would go to the board in May to June of '26.
So the work is really, we got a lot of work to do this spring
Yes,
to get
yes,
there.
yes,
And
sir.
so it seems to me we have the list of schools that we know that are going to be, we have, you're right, we don't have all the data that we're going to need, but we have pretty much, we know where the story is going. And so I think the sooner that we can get out that detailed project plan to the community so they know what to expect, they know when to engage. There's been a lot of, and for a variety of reasons, there's been a lot of sort of people getting riled up, called together, spending time, nothing happens, and yet I think the superintendent said it right, something has to happen. I mean, if there's anything that we know, something has to happen. And so the more that we can create some transparency around that, I think the community would appreciate that. Just the other piece of information that would be helpful, and it maybe marries with Dr. Bracken's presentation just a bit, is we talk about the small schools. I don't know if we know what the cost of a lot of staff is, and we know what the ratios are, but the cost of small schools, I don't know the cost of what it is to run a 250 kid school versus a 450 school, and I think that will be important because we want to make it clear to the community that we're trying to unlock resources for the community that are tied up in this sort of non-intentional small school strategy. But it's not just about ratios, and I think that's one way that we've talked about, and that's helpful. But I think we really want to make this clear that we're not running from something, we're running to something. And so I think if we can capture that narrative and say, look, if we do this very, very difficult thing, we can unlock something that's useful for our community and will help our kids.
Thank you. Katie, did you? Right aside now. Oh, now you're in. I like it.
Thank,
No, it's
thank,
all good.
thank you, Katie. I just wanted to just add something in terms of context that the awesome thing that will also be happening during this time is the development of our strategic plan, which is a 5-year outlook. And so all of this, it's a perfect storm in a good way in terms of everything is coming together, and we could look at all the pieces and it could all be driven by the strategic plan and the vision that we will create, that we have for where we want to be. And so all of this is ideally going to fall in line.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Retta.
and
Katie?
I'll piggyback, thank you, off of that, with the resetting of our goals and marrying enrollment, budget, facilities, and programming. Because as a board member who represents a district that has schools that are over capacity and under capacity, there's a lot of energy and excitement around the possibilities with the space we have. And we're at a whole new place. We can talk about those possibilities, and echoing what Ken said about really updating the community. I love slide 26, really talking about how we're marrying these things with eSPLOST, understanding some decisions will have to be made sooner than some are more long-term, but how the community gets updates on where we are in a way that really shows the possibilities, like Ken's saying. Like, we're really reimagining, what APS can look like in terms of providing that programming, that people are seeing the impact in overcapacity schools of that programming being not as full as it could be, as well as obviously programming for schools where there's undercapacity. So I'm excited about all the work we have to do and really appreciate this update with the additional information in response to questions we had in advance. So thank you.
Great, thank you. And one thing for, North Atlanta cluster specifically is when you look at, we have a number of dual campuses, right? And so then just looking at I know my community is same with yours. They have their, there, a lot of people get very excited, probably not in the way we would hope, about just the fear of just this closing, but we can't, like, both Brandon campuses won't fit in one Brandon school, and both Sutton campuses won't fit in one Sutton campus, right? So when we look at it, it's not as simple as just, we're gonna close it down, because the numbers would exceed what we have here on paper. The only exception right now is Jackson, right? So just making sure that we're looking at it through that lens of just, as we're doing strategic plan, everything makes sense, because my community hears like school closing, and they, there's a lot of sensitivity because people are so invested, right? So I get that, and I'm very empathetic to that, but it wouldn't be as simple as like, let's move everyone to one Brandon campus, because then it would be over population. So we just want to be cognizant of that. And then, which I know you are. So just, just for the sake of all of our communities that get, they're here for a reason, and we want to keep them here until those kids are graduating. And so just trying to make sure that we're listening and we're being empathetic to some of these things. And then Erica had a question, is there population growth expected in some of the low utilization school areas?
I'm sorry, can you ask it one more time?
Sure. Is there population growth expected in some of our areas where we're seeing our schools are at low utilization? Any thoughts on that, or any projection?
I would like to take that question back and be able to answer that with data, and I'd like to make that as a piece when we come back in December to be able to provide that more clarity on this. It's a very good question, but let me come back on that.
Right.
Can I ask just a quick question? Do you guys have I know we've had conversations in the past about, you could have 900 unit development coming in, but there's such a small percentage of, children that actually be attending our schools from X many. But do we have like a ratio of, per every 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 units, we get this many students,
Yes, yeah, for each of the 9 clusters, and for the specific housing type, we have something that's called the student yield rate, which is exactly what you're describing. And we have the student yield rates that we use for those new developments that are in each of those 9 clusters. And yes, some of them are very, very low, based on affordable housing mismatch with the students. Unaffordable housing does not bring a lot of kids to our schools, and we've got our.
And that's like 90% of our developments.
Most of the units we're seeing are in that category.
Okay, so what is our yield rate if?
I would be able to, let me get that to you as well.
Thank you.
That one I can get sooner. I'll get you our yield rates.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And we do not have any questions from our colleagues that are remote, so I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. All right, Dr. Bracken, dovetails probably in nicely or not. So I think Board Member Bolden said, or who was it? Ms. Howard said perfect storm, and I'm sitting here on day 46 thinking I'm in the eye of the perfect storm. Right
But in a good way, she said. All righty. Good afternoon, Board Chair, members of the board, and Dr. Johnson. Today I'll be presenting 4 topics related to finance as we cover items spanning across 3 fiscal years. First, I'll provide you with the unaudited revenue and expenditure updates for the FY24 year end. Next, I'll present you the financials for FY25 for all activities occurring in the months of July and August. I'll bring you several FY25 budget adjustments, and finally, I'll provide a brief overview of the planning process for FY26, which will include an overview of how we plan to use the monthly budget commission meetings to walk us through the development process. The next 4 slides provide an update of the unaudited consolidated general fund financials for fiscal year 2024. This first slide shows the revenue by category, budget to actuals, including variance and percent of budget. As discussed during the financial presentations throughout the year, local revenue has come in ahead of projections and balanced out the need to leverage the full amount of fund balance. Local was higher than projected due to Fulton County current real property taxes, Fulton County utility, and both DeKalb and Fulton TAVT taxes. As previously mentioned, throughout the FY25 budget development process, we anticipated using less fund balance than initially budgeted, and we did that by about half. This slide continues our analysis of FY24 revenue by comparing FY24 to the actual revenue collections for FY23. Let's see, here we go. Local revenue was up by 10.28% over the previous year. State was also up by about 8.8%, and local was up other, which includes the Title I transfer in for federal programs, is down by 3.35. Overall resources were about 13% up. On slide 5, we see the expenditure budget to actuals with remaining balance and percent of budget for FY24. Overall, we spent about 98.78% of budgeted expenditures. Slide 6 shows unaudited actual expenditures for FY24 against FY23 actuals. We see increases in all areas, but most notably pupil services due to the folding back in of CARES-funded student support positions and increased contracted services cost. Staff services are up due to additional staff and increased salary and benefits, and general administration for staff, salaries, contracted services, and increased costs for the board elections and superintendent search. Overall, spending is up about 17% from the previous fiscal year. Collecting more revenue than budgeted means that instead of using nearly $75 million of fund balance for FY24, we used about $38 million. Again, these are unaudited financials, and this number may change, but this puts us with a healthy fund balance that is the equivalent of 21.61% of the FY24 expenditures as we go into FY25. With the next 4 slides, we'll cover FY25 financials. Since we're so early in the fiscal year, there is not much information that we can currently derive from these reports. Though through the months of July and August, we've collected about 1% of the total resource budget. It's important to recall that local property taxes represent the majority of our operating budget. Bills did not go out until September 15th with a due date of October 31st. So we're starting to see those collections roll in, but won't see those reflected in the financials in a meaningful way for another couple of months. As a benchmark, we can see the revenue at this time last year was 1.12%. On slide 10, we see the budget to actual expenditures so far for FY25. A seeming lag in instruction and pupil services behind other functions is due primarily to the fact that most of our positions that are less than annual are in these functions, and salaries accrue back to the previous fiscal year for the month of July. Slide 11 represents the current spending trend for FY25 against 24 trend. While there are some fluctuations function by function, the overall spend is on pace with and slightly ahead of the previous year's spend. Please remember the timing of large expenditures from one month to the next can greatly impact the percentage spend against the previous year. The current FY25 budget assumes a usage of fund balance of $74 million, which would leave a fund balance equal to 14.22% of current year expenditures. Wrapping up FY25, we have 4 budget adjustments for approval this evening. The first is for $555,808 to transfer funds from the general fund to the school nutrition fund to cover unpaid student fees. We're increasing 2 state grants, $37,389 for the state preschool disability services grant and $59,778 for the residential treatment centers grant. Finally, we're requesting to forward fund elementary school SROs by increasing the budget by $2.3 million. Throughout the course of the year, we will be monitoring and controlling central office hiring and travel to offset these costs, and we'll bring an adjustment to restore fund balance sometime in the second half of the fiscal year. More details on the nutrition adjustment. At the end of school year 22-23, the nutrition department made a concerted effort to collect unpaid meal charges from all schools. The attempt to collect unpaid balances lasted for 1 full year. Once those funds were collected, there was still an unpaid student meal balance total of over $555,000. Federal law does not allow the nutrition fund to cover the unpaid meal balances, and therefore the district is using general fund balance to cover those as in alignment with board policy. The final piece of my presentation today will cover the FY26 budget development process. We covered the slides below in detail at the Budget Commission meeting last Thursday. The presentation for that meeting can be found in Assembly and the Budget Services website, and the recorded presentation can be found on the board's YouTube page. We'll dive right in where we left off at the end of the budget process in June with the multi-year. The multi-year does make some assumptions around revenue growth, partially constrained to no more than 3% in the out years. However, we do anticipate a continued increase in expenditures, more conservative than past years, but still greatly outpacing our revenue collections. This means that we're beginning the budget process for FY26 with a $100 million budget gap that expands to $250 million by 2030 if we take no action. Salaries and benefits are the primary cost driver for the past decade. Overall, the general fund has increased by more than 114% in the last 11 years. However, we can see that in the last few years, that growth has recently accelerated. And at this trajectory, the budget is becoming unsustainable against revenue projections. I mentioned salary and benefits as a driver, but some of the other drivers for our continued cost increases is our school size against our number of students. Also, our staffing ratios. APS employs about 2,300 to 3,100 more staff than neighboring districts. Also, some of our structures mean that we're not able to be as efficient in our spending as we could be. We've seen a rebound in central office cost in the last few years, and our charter system means that there are some inefficiencies around loss of economies of scale and our ability to leverage system-wide contract and procurement options. Our student success funding formula is predicated on a sufficient number of students within each school to derive allocations sufficient to run the school. However, 67% of our schools are receiving a small school supplement or a baseline supplement. Programs, initiatives, and supports that have not been reviewed for effectiveness continue to roll over, and there is also a potential of duplication of services between our personnel and through outsourcing to contracts and or vendors. This slide provides additional information on those staffing ratios. APS has the lowest number of students per staff at 4.78, and this compares to 6.91 to 8.24 in neighboring districts. Again, if APS staffed at similar ratios to other neighboring districts, we would have between 2,300 and 3,100 fewer staff. And at an average salary of over $100,000, that includes benefits, we would see savings of between $251 and $343 million. This slide provides additional details on our school sizes. Our district has an average of 569 students per school, which compares to between 695 and nearly 1,300 in neighboring districts. If APS had comparable school sizes to our neighboring districts, we would have between 16 and 49 fewer schools. Just a note that this is only capturing school codes and does not take into account our dual campuses, ninth grade academies, or other satellite buildings that could also exacerbate this overhead. This chart demonstrates the history of enrollment at APS and what is creating some of the pressure around our small schools and increased central office cost. Since 2015, overall enrollment has declined by more than 1,600 students, but we see the biggest shift away from our traditional schools. We have nearly 7,500 students less, or 17% fewer students in traditional schools since 2015. The following three charts demonstrate the impact on small schools as a cost driver. On these charts, we are showing our per pupil spend for FY25, and in all cases, you can see that the highest per pupil is allocated to our smallest schools. In some cases, a school has 3 times the per pupil allocation as other schools in the district. Again, the total budget on these slides is just that allocation that is at the school code and does not include any administrative overhead. You'll notice the per pupil spend on some of our individual schools in many cases is higher than the total per pupil spend in other neighboring districts, which is inclusive of administrative overhead. And finally, I'll call attention to our programs, which do not receive state funding, but also have per pupil allocations for APS allotted to the homeschool, which means we are duplicating some funding in some of our non-traditional and program offerings. This slide demonstrates some of the district's spending on programs and initiatives in addition to the baseline allocations provided to schools through SSF. Some of our programs have been in effect since 2016, and in most cases, we are unable to directly align that spending with student outcomes. Just from the subset of initiatives, we have over $63 million we could review for effectiveness. And finally, this slide shows the history of our central office against the spend in our charters and traditional schools. While school growth has increased steadily over the years, department budgets have experienced years of large decreases and large increases. However, we do not see an overall central office decline that would align with the enrollment decline in our traditional schools. This leads to 5 decision points that we will be considering over the FY26 budget development process. First, assumptions around salary increases and non-personnel inflationary growth. Second, a decision to opt in or out of House Bill 581 homestead exemption. Third, a review of the school funding formula and other programmatic allocations, which is leading to extremely high per pupil spending, not always aligned with student achievement. 4, right-sizing the district with a review of the number of schools versus current and trending enrollment, and right-sizing and strategically aligning the number of staff members. 5, a review of central office allocations and streamlining across all departments. Ultimately, we do know that this budget can be balanced by refining both revenue and expenditure assumptions. However, it is going to take some hard review and some difficult decisions around the number of schools we support, our central office offerings, our program offerings, and how we allocate to schools. However, if we do the hard work going into FY26, then we can demonstrate that by FY28, we will have restored the district's fund balance to recommended levels and be positioned to make deeper investments in strategically aligned areas going forward. We're proposing to use Budget Commission schedule to walk us through those 5 decision points I mentioned before, and our next meeting is scheduled for October 24th. This slide does have the October 17th date, but that is during our district break, so we are moving that to October 24th, and we'll discuss draft parameters, school allotments, and the right size overview at that time. That concludes my presentation. I will take all the questions you have.
All of them.
All of them.
Okay, you want to start here? Katie, go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Bracken. And of course, people can see and hear even more deeper conversation about all of this at our Budget Commission meeting this past week. Just want to thank you again for laying everything out with such transparency. And even though it's, day 46, we said? Who's counting?
I am.
We appreciate all the work you've done already, Dr. Johnson, and really talking about evaluating for effectiveness. That's extremely important because the reason we're all here is to improve student outcomes, and we're looking at the impact there. So, and we'll be talking about the data in our next presentation on student outcomes-focused governance around ELA and literacy. My question right now is about nutrition. Completely support paying that amount. Recall that we made that decision and think we had a year to try to still collect. How are we doing things differently going forward in terms of making sure that those who can pay are, and we're so excited about our nutrition program growing and more students taking advantage of it and families, and always want to make sure no child has to worry about eating in any of our schools. That clearly is one of the priorities we've highlighted in the investment in nutrition, but just curious how we're working to not have this, if we can avoid it going forward in terms of proactively.
Sure. So I know that the nutrition department is doing a lot. We've talked about this also, I think, at our policy committee meeting when we first talked about the policy that refined the nutrition collections, about what steps we would take first to make sure that the general fund transfer to nutrition is kind of the last option. The nutrition team can maybe offer additional details, but I know that they're doing letters, they're doing emails, they're doing more contact to parents to reach out who have dues that are owed. And I think that's, I don't have more detail around that right now, but that's the bulk of what we're doing, is trying to ramp up those collection efforts. I will also say that there's been efforts in trying to identify and get more schools certified for CEP or to get Title I allocations, get those free and reduced forms in so that we are capturing all of the students and getting more schools free lunches as much as possible.
Thank you, because we certainly want to make sure everyone can take advantage of our nutrition program, and obviously we're supportive of it, but want to be responsible as well. Thank you.
Loretta.
Thank you, Katie, for your question. That was one of mine in terms of moving forward. How do we prevent that from being a problem? Thank you, Ken. My other question, real quick, around the elementary SROs. Is that budgeted for schools that have more than one campus? Will they have more than one SRO? Is it per facility or campus? What is the?
Yeah, I can talk through the assumptions and this number. How it actually gets rolled out might be different, but what we assumed is 46 SROs, which would include dual campus. Elementary, we have a start date of January. We do know that once this budget is passed, there will be a process for actually hiring and filling positions. And we do have some non-personnel startup costs built into this number as well. So again, that's 46 SROs as part of our assumptions, January start date. There is some vacancy assumptions built in there as well. But that will get us through this fiscal year, and we'll start next year by expanding our gap a bit, so we'll need to think about how to fold that into the multi-year as well.
So any type of special, specific training around the skills needed for officers working with children at this level and all that would be included in this figure?
Yeah, I know that that's part of why the hiring process is extended for our SROs, just making sure that we are getting the highest quality candidates, and any training that goes into that before they're started, I know is part of the reason we pushed that start date out a little bit.
Thank you for clarifying.
Sir?
Thank you, Dr. Brackton, as always, very thorough. I want to pick up right where Board Member Baldwin stopped around the SROs. Is it possible that, I mean, this is a huge investment, and, you know, if we had, it's a question about if you have $1 to spend, do you spend on SRO, do you spend on more mental health and social support for students at the elementary level? I understand what the decision that, and this is really maybe for Dr. Johnson, but I'd love for this to be an evaluative period in this coming semester and see how it works before we automatically bake this into the budget. And like you said, very quietly, but directly, and expand the gap in our budget. And so I understand that we all, you know, I have children in schools. We want, you know, safety is our core responsibility. I want to make sure we're spending it on the right thing. And so if we can make sure that we're evaluating how this goes this semester before we automatically assume that this is the right way forward and build this into our baseline. Point two, or question two, this question about how much school size costs is still eluding me a little bit. If you go to slide 21, you break down what that we have all these small schools, but at some point I'd love to have dollars attached to this. So what does it cost? And maybe you have to work with Mr. Hoskins to talk about what the plant size is and what the HVAC, you know, what the utilities are and the extra costs that are tied to this. But we could reduce our school footprint and not actually change our staffing ratios. I mean, those two things could happen. And so if we are, as we move through this process, I think getting thoughtful about and getting clear with the community about how much money it saves when we get in line, I think would be helpful.
One thing that SSF allows us to do that we did not have access to with our traditional funding formula is we have a dollar amount for the small school supplement, whereas before that was embedded in the one per allocations at our schools, one principal, whether it's 200 students or 2,000 students. But now we do have a small school supplement. That's over $6 million.
So that comes right off the top. And
that's
there's
right
there's
off the
other
top.
savings too, I imagine.
And that's not counting utilities. That's
Right.
not counting other. So that is, a conservative estimate of small
So,
schools.
and I think the number, I think it'll probably be multiples of that. And so providing us with that information, I think will make it easier to talk to our community about that. And then the last one on page 19, since you have the slide up, you have all these structures that you want to investigate there at the bottom. Again, this is really where I think getting, menus have prices. And so as we get into these conversations, and we're going to have to make some very difficult trade-offs, getting clarity around what does it mean to, you talk about inefficiencies of the charter system. I bet we could get, I'm a big believer in the charter system, but I could get behind some centralized purchasing or some ideas if we understand what those things are. And so as we work through this process, the specificity will be really helpful here.
Yeah.
Then lastly, are you concerned about revenue? It's down. We're not quite where we wanted to be last year. We're a few basis points back. Are you concerned about it?
For revenue for FY25 or 24?
For 25.
Nope, we're feeling good at this point. 1% is not going to make a big difference. We'll start seeing as those, we're starting to see it now. We're starting to get in the 10, 15, $20 million checks from Fulton County right now, and we'll continue to see that in November, which you won't see until January because of the way we present. that's when we'll start to see like actual trend against previous year and whether or not we need to start streamlining a little bit or not. But at this point, those is just when we get the checks can greatly impact the trend to the previous year.
I appreciate that. I understand Board Member Baldwin has not received a property tax bill yet, so if you could make sure that.
I'll make sure that, yeah. I got some
don't let that one slip.
You. Thank you so much. So, no, you can have mine. I don't want it. On page 15, thank you for highlighting that what I would call as an outrageous number of the school unpaid meal balances. I mean, so anything we can help do, I appreciate Katie, as you lead the budget commission, that's critical. That's a really high number. And I'm sure that $18 of it I just learned is mine, apparently, because my son's been enjoying that Smart Mouth pizza at school. But that's really a critical number that we can't sustain. Like, it's not sustainable. And then on the SRO piece, I absolutely respect Ken's point about evaluative. Parts of my community have been asking for SROs for a very long time. I really appreciate the very swift response from Dr. Johnson and for you all meeting to kind of talk through, because that was very quick. While there is mixed reviews, at least in my part of the district, about not everyone actually wants SROs at the elementary level, but the majority really do. So thank you for being so thoughtful in the approach, because, in putting this task force together, just to hear from people in a very real way. And as Dr. Johnson said, I want them to actually go and get work done. We don't need to sit around and just talk about it. We were like, what can we actually implement and do? So I'm appreciative of it. Obviously, I'm on my way out of the school system, but I do know that there is some solace that people have in seeing officers on the campuses. So I appreciate the work that's being done on that behalf. Erica.
You can go ahead. I'm just stepping back in. So I'll turn it over to my colleagues.
We weren't even gonna tell nobody.
I said it.
That was a lot to digest. But thank you so much to my colleagues for their questions, because you guys kind of leaned in on some of the things I was concerned about or wanting to know more about. I guess I'll start with the SRO ask of the 2.3 million. I do appreciate you saying, I believe you said it was 46 officers was going to be what we're seeking there. I am sensitive to what Board Member McDonald said, because I just remember, and I know just in being around our district, the climate and the attitude towards SROs is very different from one neighborhood to the next or from one grade band to the next. And I do encourage us to be very thoughtful and intentional about this. I know what it feels like to deal with, being locked down in your building and not sure exactly what's happening. I go through it on a regular basis, unfortunately. It is I think in many cases at this time right now specifically, there is an appetite for students and teachers and families to feel like districts are being intentional in doing something. I do understand we have a budget deficit to be mindful of, but I think the price of ensuring that every child and every staff member goes home every day can never be too high, and I would encourage us to be courageous, honestly, about what we invest when it comes to our security, but also thoughtful. To Board Member Loretta Baldwin's point, in terms of our folks, our officers receiving the right training? Is there the right thoughtfulness around the people who we're tasking with the responsibility to be around our children? As a Black man, the thing I'm most mindful of is ensuring that increasing the presence of officers doesn't increase the amounts of adjudication that are Black boys specifically experience in this district. And so I would challenge us to be intentional that if we increase the amount of SROs we have, that we decrease the amount of days of suspension we give out, that we decrease the amount of violence that happens in our schools, that we decrease the amount of adjudication that happens to our children. I think if we can be intentional about both, then we can build the trust that we need, that I think would get more buy-in from our communities. I don't mean to go on a soapbox, but I think that's important because as a black man, I see too often black boys get into what we consider just a fist fight or altercation, and it turns into a case. And that changes the trajectory of too many kids' lives, and I don't want to play a part in expanding that. I am curious, what is the total additional cost of operating our charter schools as opposed to if they were APS managed? And I would like to be able to see that contrast per each school. I know that, I've seen us do adjustments, budget adjustments, $250 million at a time, $25 million at a time, $27 million. That's a lot of money that goes towards our charters. And as we're looking at right-sizing this budget, I want us to also be mindful again that we don't leave these contracts that we have off the table when we're looking at what is going to get us the best outcomes.
Yeah, we can run that. I think it goes to the previous question around during the facilities presentation about where are the charter schools, where are the students coming from? And it sounds like we have tables or that we can reproduce tables that push those kids back into our schools. And as soon as we get our hands on that, we can rerun the budgets at that per pupil, see how many schools are getting lesson, small school supplement, and how that drives that allocation and get that number for you.
Yeah, and I am just curious. My personal belief, we legally require children to be in school and for parents to send their kids to school. I personally believe that no child should be paying for lunch. And I'm curious, what would it cost us as a district to supply lunch for every child? I'm also curious if as a district, I know at Benteen, where my son is, no child pays for lunch because that school has a grant that allows for that. I'm curious, are we seeking, finding, are there grants that we could get so we don't expand the deficit, but that we provide a meal for every child in Atlanta Public Schools without a cost to the family?
That's something I would need to look into as well.
Thank you.
And actually, my question follows on Board Member Brooks' question about the cost of the charters and what we would be spending to educate those students in our own schools. I'd like to have the same information about the partner schools. I think we spend about $25,000 per student on the partners. I'd also like to know how we figure that number.
So how we figure it, I can do.
Okay.
So that is just our total budget for each year divided by the enrollment. And then that generates a per pupil for the district, which we then apply to the number of students in the partner school. So that's the rough calculation. So if our budget this year for the general fund is 1.2 million, it's 1.2 billion divided by our total student enrollment gives us a per pupil for the district, which is then applied to the number of students in that partner school.
So, which is why just doing the rough math comes out right about the average
That's
amount
right.
that we spend on
Because
a
it's
student.
inclusive of the administrative overhead.
Okay. When we, but that doesn't take into account where the school is or how much we're spending on similar schools in the area or what we would be spending if they were in our schools.
That's
It's
correct.
just-
There is
it's
no
just a-
equity component to the charter or the partner allocations. For the charters, it is just the state funding formula that we run and then pass the funding on. And for the partners, it's the flat per pupil amount. So we're not looking at student needs or attributes when we're allocating to the charters and partners.
Thank you.
Hey, yeah, just real brief, two things I want to add. Thank you, Lisa, for the presentation. Want to speak to SROs in the consideration. Just to clarify, there won't be an SRO in every elementary school tomorrow. There is a hiring process, and so that will take some time. And I think to your earlier question of seeing how it's going, we'll be able to observe that, right? Like as we scale up and ramp up, we'll be able to get a good feel for how that implementation is going. I will say this just philosophically, I think we are reaching a point as a country in K-12 education where I already know that the national recommendation is that there's an SRO on every campus. I think more and more we're just innately leaning that way, right, wrong, or indifferent. That's just where we are. And what when I go to bed at night as a superintendent, and I commit this to you, I never want to be in a, we can't always control all the external things that happen that come into a campus. What we can control is our response. And what I never want to be in a situation of is ever having an unfortunate tragedy on our campus and saying, why didn't we? So, so that's, I think, kind of where we are, and I feel that sense from parents, and I know there's variability kind of across the system on, across the state, country for that matter, on that. I think the points are well taken around continuing to ensure, in particular at the youngest grade band and on up, that our SROs are intentionally trained and they do go through additional training and have additional requirements that are there. The other piece I want to really speak to that I think is really important to elevate with two very heavy topics that went on today. The third being our heaviest, which is outcomes-focused student achievement. I want us to be careful, and I want this body to be careful, in particular serving as your superintendent, that we don't abort where we look to go from the standpoint of vision and future for the urgency of the moment and right now. Like I think we've got a little bit of both things going on. We've got the facts that have probably been staring this district in the face for the last decade or more. And in the midst of these facts that are here, capacity issue, the enrollment's been declining since 2015, okay? And that's a reality. That didn't start 4 to 6 days ago. Right, so that's a reality, right? The budgetary challenges that's before us didn't start 4 to 6 days ago. And so I want us to be clear that we deal with these facts with urgency, which we will, but that we also give space to hear from our community and to hear collectively in where we want to be, right? So I think we've got to balance the two. We've got to deal with what we've got to deal with urgency, but then we also have to make sure there's space to understand where people want us to go. Because I think what we're going to find, my experience has been, that where people want us to go may actually marry up with a lot of what we need to get done innately. And so it positions us really well to do some of the challenging work that we know we need to do for our students. So I just want to lift those couple of points as we get into student outcomes focused governance.
So now it's time for us to engage in the board goal monitoring and interim goal 1.1 and 1.2. Interim goal 1.1 identifies the percentage of students in grades 3 through 5 at a Georgia Milestone English Language Arts end of grade assessment achievement level of proficiency or above as estimated by the MAP Growth Reading Assessment. Interim goal 1.2 identifies the percentage of the students in grades 6 through 8 at a Georgia Milestone ELA end of grade assessment achievement level of proficiency or above as estimated by the MAP Growth Reading Assessment. I would like to take some time to review the norms and expectations for the monitoring session. As Dr. Johnson takes us through the monitoring report, he will discuss the district progress towards meeting the interim goal 1.1, the percentage of students in grades 3.5 with a projected Georgia Milestone achievement level of proficient or above in ELA reading on the district universal screeners assessment will increase from 38.4% in May of 2024 to 41.4% in May 2025. Interim goal 1.2, the percentage of students in grades 6 through 8 with a projected Georgia Milestones achievement level of proficient or above ELA reading on the district universal screener assessment will increase from 31.2% in May 2024 to 34.2% in May 2025. Board members, comments and questions will be focused on creating an engagement dialogue with the superintendent. What are the factors that leads to current levels of achievement? Did the district make progress towards school year 2024 goals? Why or why not? What strategies and resources worked well or what did not work well? What changes and adjustment needs to be made? Will the district require additional resources to meet this goal? What supports do you need from the board to be successful? Please hold your questions until Dr. Johnson has had a chance to walk through the entire report. Board member comments and questions should not be evaluative. Tell the superintendent what to do, suggest administration actions, reference to data that is not in this report. If we stray away from the norms and expectations, I or one of our colleagues will remind us of the norms and expectations and ask that you rephrase your questions and comments to align with the norms and expectations. Dr. Johnson, would you please walk us through the monitoring report?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So a couple things. We'll obviously walk through the report, the slides, the data, and then hopefully we can spend the balance of the time kind of talking through next steps and having conversation. And I'll put this group on alert. I know Dr. Butler is out there, and I see Tommy Usher. Just get queued up and ready because we might have some questions coming your way of some specific things that I think we should alert you all and obviously the public about. So Figure 1 which shows us our actual progress towards Board Goal 1 literacy, the percentage of students in grades 3 through 8 that are scoring proficient or above in reading as measured by the Georgia Milestone, which we state will increase from 31.2% in August 2022 to Y percentage in August 2026. The Y percentage is shown as the end target because the board has expressed the need to reset the targets to align with the 2022 baseline. On the legend, you can see that the blue line shows our target, the orange line shows the actual level of performance, and the purple shows the pre-baseline. The figure shows that 33.5% of students in grades 3 through 8 are scoring at proficient or higher on the spring school year 2024 Georgia Milestones ELA assessment. This is a 2.2 percentage point gain from school year 2023. This is nearly a percentage point higher than what the map predicted. Our current annual target requires a 3.85% percentage gain. And while we're pleased to see these gains, the recognition is that it is still below the current target. Now, if we look at Figure 2, we're going to review the results for Interim Goal 1.1, which identifies the percentage of students in grades 3 through 5 scoring at a Georgia Milestone ELA EOG assessment projected achievement level of proficiency or above as estimated by the MAP Growth Reading Assessment. The interim goals are designed, in effect, to help us monitor our progress towards the actual board goals. It's important to note that the interim goals have been set for 1 year and will end at the end of the close of the year. The data represents a single snapshot in time, and we expect to see our scores vary throughout the year due to the changes in content. So I would really like to call your attention to Figure 2. This figure shows the percentage of students in grades 3 through 5. When you look at the legend, again, the blue line in the figure shows our target line, and the orange line shows our actual current level of progress. The letter N shows us the number of students that are projected to score proficient or higher. This is the number behind the percentage. Looking at the orange line, we can see that 39.8% of the students are currently projected to score proficient or higher on the spring Georgia Milestone ELA assessment. When comparing fall 2023 to our current fall data, we see very little gains. Now we're looking at figure 3. This figure shows us interim goal 1.2, which is the percentage of students in grade 6-8 scoring at an estimated achievement level of proficient or above in ELA and reading. Just as a reminder, the orange is our actual. N shows us the number of students that have demonstrated the projected proficiency. You know the content about our interim goals, which are designed to help us monitor our progress towards your goals. And so the data, our current data shows 34.1% of students are projected to score at proficient or higher on the Georgia Milestone ELA assessment. This is 2.1 percentage points higher than our fall 2023 MAP assessments. And so when we look at section 3, overall progress, I'd like to call your attention to the color-coded legend. Red, which is below target, yellow, which is developing, the green, which is on track, that'd be the neon green, the dark green, which is exceeding. And then when we look at based on our 2024 Georgia Milestone data, we are currently below target. Our progress for interim goals 1.1 and 1.2 is to be determined. The winter map, which will be administered in the next, month and a half or so, will show us our progress towards interim goal 1.1. Figure 4 shows us our estimated individual elementary grade level results for the Georgia Milestone ELA EOG achievement. The graph shows us the estimated Georgia Milestones performance levels for fall 2023, spring 2024, and the fall of 2024. When comparing the 3 different testing administration windows, we see very little difference in the performance levels. Figure 5, when looking at the individual grade levels, we see very little difference in the performance level when looking at the 3 different testing administrations. However, when we look at 6th grade, we do see that their projected achievement is significantly higher than the other grade levels. Now we're going to look at Table 1. As a reminder, the denominator includes all students within the subgroup. And so we're looking at subgroup data now. For the fall MAP assessment, the all students shows an increase of 1.6 percentage points when comparing fall 2023 to current scores. While the Asian, white, and gifted subgroups show declines, the majority of our student groups show gains. The greatest projected gains are in the former English language learner group with a 6.5% percentage point gain, and the economically disadvantaged group with a 4.6 percentage point gain. The Black and Hispanic student groups showed slight gains, but we still have significant gaps when compared to white student groups. As a reminder, we do expect to see our scores vary throughout the year due to the changes in content. So when we think about some next steps, we know it's important to work collaboratively across divisions and departments to create a cohesive teaching and learning model with seamless alignment between curriculum, instruction, and assessment. We will continue to support schools with the implementation of the curriculum materials with rigor and fidelity to the instructional best practices in Tier 1 during the 24-25 school year. So training is ongoing. Cox Campus Science of Reading training is ongoing, and that partnership we look to continue to strengthen and to make even better. We also know that Dr. Butler and Mr. Usher have established a literacy task force really in multifold or multi-layered. So there's a group of kind of elementary principals that take keen interest and have a keen expertise in the area of literacy that we've already pulled in as a group of advisors. And then the next step is for teachers and staff to pull them in as well, to have a conversation with them about the opportunity to make sure that we lean in and conduct focus groups to make sure that our curriculum and resources are aligned to the new standards and to ensure the equity of distribution. I think one of the things that was identified with the rollout of materials, as recent as 2 weeks ago, I was with a principal, and there was still kind of waiting on some resources to come. So how the resources were deployed, the timing of deployment, I think were things that, you know, with any adoption, there are challenges because, you know, new adoptions, new resources or change, but we know there's going to be some opportunity to lean in to make sure we distribute those resources in as intentional a way as possible. The 14th of this month is the PL Day, and so the PL Day will be focused just kind of explicitly on literacy, and there will be other things, but that's the focus really of the day. Those are going to be site-based, and so obviously schools has been, and academics have been working with school leaders around that. And then we want to continue to partner with key stakeholders and communicate just our next steps in general as we work to achieve some of these goals. So I'm going to put them on the spot right now with absolute no preparation, but to speak in candor, Dr. Butler, who you may not have already met, but I'm going to ask Dr. Butler to come up, who's the new Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning, and Tommy to come up as well. And if you would, just speak a little bit to what the conversations with school leaders and kind of some of the work, and then I know Dr. Butler, feel free. I'd love you to speak to a little bit of what is happening with just teaching and learning, in particular from a literacy standpoint, and the PL Day in particular, and advisement from schools around that.
All right. Good evening, Dr. Johnson, Board Chair Mitchell, the entire board. So Dr. Butler and I, we've had the pleasure of engaging with principals across the district to better understand the literacy needs, no matter what cluster you're in, around the material and resources that they currently have, the actual practices that they're using within their literacy block, so that we can kind of see from a service standpoint how we may be able to then plug in and provide additional support to those schools. As Dr. Johnson mentioned, there's a lot of opportunity around the implementation of our previous Readers Are Leaders initiative that didn't quite make the mark that we were looking to meet earlier in the school year. And so we're trying to now look at spaces where the resources and the training actually have been implemented, in other areas where they have not been implemented. And in those areas where they've not been implemented, how do we push in and provide the necessary support to those individual schools? So in other words, we have some schools that are using the Flyleaf, Morphing Magic, and other resources that were a part of the literacy rollout. And then other spaces where they've not received the resources and they've not received the proper training, but yet they still need support with utilizing the resources that they currently have in their buildings. We also have schools that are not necessarily using those resources for various reasons, but they have strong resources that they've used in the past that have garnered strong reading results for those schools. And so we're learning from those schools as well what those resources are, how they were implemented, and then how we might then sort of cross-pollinate across the organization so that other schools can learn those practices as well. And so we're leaning in and taking guidance and advice from principals who are on the ground doing the work every day. Additionally, Dr. Butler has also introduced this idea of bringing in teachers and instructional coaches who are more close to the students than even the principals to better understand what their needs are, so that we're expanding our reach and making it more deep in the schools.
Good evening. So just to build on what Mr. Usher said, one of the things, or some of the things that we're looking to do as we accelerate literacy, the literacy initiative across this 100 days, is really work with our stakeholders to make sure that we are engaging everyone that will be impacted by this and receive a benefit from this, because that, just coming in, I'm realizing that the listening and the engagement is going to be key to our success across the board. So working with the principal task force to hear what some of their lessons learned and successes are with our current initiative, but also attending the community listening events where it has been expressed on multiple occasions that not only our focus on K-5 is needed, but 6-12 also has some areas for opportunity. I heard that several times across the 4 listening tours. And so that's where we have shifted our PO day, even though it's school-based, but to use it as an opportunity to accelerate literacy across K-12 and to also engage with school-based stakeholders to find out exactly what the needs are. So we know we pushed in terms of the Cox campus training, in terms of some of the resources with K-5. We know that we had that underway, and those are some things that we need to reframe. But we also need to dig in a little bit more deeper to see what type of curriculum resources and assessments do we have available. We know that some of the research indicates to us that high-quality curriculum materials leads to some of that student achievement. So we want to do a deep, thorough audit, not just of K-5, but of K-12, to see what do we have in our buildings, what's working, what's not working. But also some of the things that came out of the listening session is that not just having conversations with classroom teachers, but everyone who engaged with our learners, such as anyone who's working with special education, someone who, a staff member that may be working with our English language learners. So really to get all of those voices into the the conversation, so that way our reach and our plan is comprehensive and it meets the needs of the diversity of learners that we serve.
And do we have any questions? Okay. I do have one question, but I'll turn it over to you, Cynthia Briscoe Brown and Chevy Brooks. Go ahead.
Okay. I'd like to go back to something Mr. Usher said just a couple of minutes ago about there being schools and school leaders that are not using the materials because they're using other materials or other curricula that they've had some success with in the past. Is that a reasonable paraphrase of what you said?
Yes, so they're not necessarily using the material because of the previous resource, but rather they have not received all of the resources associated with Readers Are Leaders.
Okay.
So they're relying on their previous resources and training for other resources in lieu of not having the resources from Readers Are Leaders.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes more sense because the literacy policy we passed last year specifically said that we need to review, we directed the administration to review all current literacy materials, all currently used literacy materials to ensure that they align with the science of reading. So are we making progress on that?
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in. So talk about the Cox campus if you want to. So everybody's being trained in the science of reading. So science
Correct.
of reading is the foundation for all
Okay.
of us. So you're going to innately, as a result of that, I'll just answer. I see better alignment across the district, and I think the resource conversation is one. It's a timing piece, and so as I've dug in more with some school leaders, et cetera, you had situations where. Because students were at different levels, some of what was deployed was maybe not enough of one particular resource, and so there's been a lot of, 5 extra of these are sitting here, let's deploy them over there to that school that needs 5 more of those, and so kind of there's been some shuffling of resources across the district as best I think we can in trying to roll them with this rollout.
And I guess what I'm trying to get at is that I know that prior to our passing the literacy policy, there were resources being used which have been debunked, which have been shown not to be successful. And so which in at least 1 or 2 cases that's been said by the people who developed the resources. And so one of the reasons we baked that requirement into the literacy policy was because we wanted to make sure that every resource, every curriculum, every framework we use is aligned with the science of reading and aligned with actual successful practices. And so when you start talking about there are principals that are using things they've used before because it worked and because they don't have the right ones, that concerns me.
Yeah, so I can go deeper in that. So an example of that is previously using Foundations. And so Foundations is a research-based program. The issue with Foundations is that it doesn't necessarily address the phonemic awareness piece, for which we were adding a resource like Heggerty, which is part of the Readers Are Leaders rollout, because the Foundations didn't have that phonemic awareness piece. And so what the Cox Campus modules will do, it provides teachers with the training around how to teach phonemic awareness, even without a resource. And so when I say some individual principals were using a previous resource, it's the Foundations piece, but because they didn't necessarily receive all of the resources through the Readers Are Leaders in rollout. So they're using the Foundations, but using the Cox Campus training with that particular resource, if that makes sense.
Okay. When do we expect to have complete rollout?
Yeah, I'm just shooting here. I shouldn't say shooting, that's bad.
We'll take the best guess you've got.
So I would say you're going to see some continued evolution of the rollout through the rest of the semester and candidly into next year. Like, let me be clear, the rollout, there's always opportunity to improve rollouts. There was opportunity to improve this rollout, period, point blank, end of story. And so we'll continue to work with schools in what they need, but that's going to be through the remainder of this this semester. Many of our schools receive the materials within the first week or two of school being open, and so that's just a challenging time to get materials in the hands of teachers and leaders and expect them to move it forward. There's also, it continues to be some opportunity to continue to make sure that the work of academics is strongly aligned with, or teaching and learning is strongly aligned with leadership. And so, the fact that these two are standing together, I think it's really important that when teaching and learning adopts something that leadership is thinking about, school, how we're going to help principals roll this out. And the only way you can do that is for you to understand it as well. And so it's really important that connectivity is there. So, we're still finding some schools that are missing one or two of these or 4 or 5 of these based on kind of where students are, and we're making every effort to get those students exactly what they need, and school leaders exactly what they need in the moment. I'll give a specific example. Hollis, like 2 weeks ago, she needed 5 or 7 of whatever it was. Let's go figure it out. And so as we continue to find those out, which we will, we'll continue to kind of reshuffle resources based on kind of student need.
Okay. And bringing this back to student outcomes, what impact do we believe the lack of resources and the unevenness of resources has had on the numbers that we've been presented tonight? I assume it has some impact.
Yeah,
because we don't have good data on how effective what we're doing is if we haven't been doing it consistently. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm trying to, I can't pull a crystal ball answer out of where we'll be from a proficiency standpoint. I think anytime you see a new implementation, candidly speaking, you're always trying to avoid a dip. And so I don't, our charge is to make sure that we fill as many of the gaps as possible. If your question is this implementation going to solve our literacy challenge? We're not, I don't anticipate us, I'm just being fully transparent, having, these double-digit literacy gains this cycle. I want to be abundantly clear. But I think we're, I see a good framework and groundwork like that's happening in swell and focus around this area. I think another thing that's of importance to note is I've now been in every traditional school in this district. There are a ton of teachers who are Orton Gillingham. Yeah, I don't do that. I don't do that. I've been in every I've been in every school in this district, and I'll tell principal I'm getting ready to come a second time, and this time I'm not. There won't be any announcement like I'll tell you the day of, because and it's not a bad thing. I just love being in schools. I mean, that's where the work happens, right? And that's how you can find out. Yeah, that's how you can find out directly from a principal. I'm missing 5 of these kids, right? And they'll tell you, and then I can bother Tommy and Dr. Butler, Mr. Usher, and Dr. Butler, but. But I think, again, we're in this evolution right now, and I think we're going to continue to learn some things. But there are a ton of teachers and instructional coaches that are in the literacy front that are, frankly, I was surprised, like Orton Gillingham. You have almost whole schools that are Orton Gillingham trained. We've got, one of the probably few in the country, I get it wrong, like master trained or what is she? I can't forget. I forget exactly what the titling is, but it's like the highest level you can go to in Orton Gillingham. We have several that are continuing to progress. So we've got some folks that really know what to do. It's like getting everybody rowing in the right direction and getting the resources in folks' hands and implementing it in the right way. A lot of partners in this space, and so we're digging deeper with several of those partners to make sure that we get all that we can out of this movement.
Thank you.
Board Member Brooks.
Thank you so much. I'm glad we started from this side because all my questions end up getting answered before you get down to me anyway. I think for a lot of folks in the public, they see the $12 million investment that we just made in literacy in this budget, and there's going to be a lot of expectation for results, right? And if we're being transparent with the public, can we say that the numbers that we're seeing this semester, this fall 2024, essentially these are baseline numbers, right? Like we cannot attribute any of the Cox modules and that training. We can't attribute the 1.6% overall growth, 1.7% growth to what we're doing with the Our Leaders program, correct? So I guess then my next question is on the implementation piece. I heard that not every school has all of the resources that they need, not yet. My question is what are the challenges? Is it just a matter of shuffling resources, or is it a matter of like capacity of resources or availability of resources, I should say?
So I'll jump in and get us started. It's a matter of, I would say, availability or capacity. So what happens with several of the resources is typically you would order a set of textbooks based on the number of kids you have in the class. With the Readers and Leaders resources, it doesn't necessarily work that way. You first test the students first to see which students belong at a certain level. Then those resources are provided based on the level. With our rollout of Readers and Leaders, every school received resources in a more traditional methodology. So if you have 20 third graders, you got 20 kits. Well, in actuality, when we assessed the third graders, you actually needed a lot more kits. And so because of that, we ended up having these variances in availability of resources based on need in schools. And so to Dr. Johnson's point, once we became aware, we started to call schools. We worked with Dr. Butler's team to reshuffle and shift resources around the district based on the need as designed by this particular resource. Did I get your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So do we know what percentage of schools are adequately resourced now versus those that are not?
We're working towards that. So that is the audit that Dr. Butler mentioned. We're currently working with the principals to audit what resources do they currently have and what do they need so that we can more quickly shift those resources to those schools. We know some schools, Dr. Johnson mentioned Hollis, that's because the interim principal there has been reaching out quite frequently. So we know Hollis is one, but we don't yet know across the organization.
And when we're screening our students, the screener that we're using is the Milestone, correct?
No. So
Okay.
Go ahead.
No,
So there are some screeners that are part of the Flyleaf resource that are naturally a part of that curricular resources. And so we start there, and we also include our MAP fall scores to screen our kids.
and what does that screener look like? Is it like a standardized test, or, I'm just curious, actually.
Yeah, it's not a standardized test. It's for Flyleaf because it deals with, and I don't want to talk out of turn, but I think it's one that's dealing more with phonics and phonemic awareness, or it's more of a sound and, that sort of thing. It's not, it's different.
It's not a sit and get kind of test, if you will.
Well, it's more performance-based, and so you will have in the K3 space a student sitting, repeating sounds, if that makes sense. So it is in some way sitting at.
Got you. I did want to elevate my appreciation for speaking up about the 6 to 12 students. As a high school teacher, I teach high school seniors. Unfortunately, there are times where I have students read something on the board, and you can tell like we missed the opportunity with that kid. I want to just express how much I appreciate that notion, because I had a lot of questions about that, because we're being very intentional, between 3rd and 5th grade. But I want to emphasize that it's so important that we don't give up on kids just because we miss doing the right thing by them so far. And so I'd love for us to keep that spirit of, thinking about ways that we can invest in their access to literacy. I would also encourage us to be thoughtful about adult literacy rates. What can we be doing for the families? My reality in looking at my classroom, the students who perform the best are students who typically have the higher Lexile. Or my students who have the higher Lexiles typically are students who come from a family with at least one college-educated parent, right? And so my students that come from parents with literacy challenges, many times are the students that, the challenges are generational. And so, I encourage us as a district to be thoughtful about the fact that literacy is generational, and it requires help with the child, but as well as help with the family and the home. We got to get families reading together. That's going to change everything. We can't do it by ourselves. That's all I got.
I do have a question, but before I ask my question, I want to say thank you for putting in page 8, which talks about the administrative strategy and next steps, and also how to achieve the goal. And then the last part of it, APS will need board support in the following areas. If you can look through your packet, that's on page 8. That gives us a kind of a detailed next steps, what's to come with this progress monitoring report, and it's very, very, very helpful. So thank you for whoever put the report together. But my question is regarding the literacy rollout. I had opportunity to kind of go and visit a couple of schools. And one of the schools that I always want to make sure we never leave out, and Dr. Johnson has been very good at making sure he goes to all schools, whether it's partner, charter, traditional, everyone gets a visit from Dr. Johnson. But at Hank Aaron, New Beginnings, I just remember a conversation around being able to have access to this literacy rollout and this literacy support within the Hank Aaron New Beginning School, because that is the opportunity where you have students that might be behind, have some behavior challenges, but the classroom size are very small, and so it's to have that additional support with literacy to get them caught up. So I just want to know, one, is that, I don't want to say if it's being done or not being done, because we serve everyone, but how is that being rolled out for Hank Aaron New Beginnings?
So I'll begin by saying that is a very good point. Dr. Butler is taking notes, and I'm sure Shelley Goodrum, the associate supporting Hank Aaron, is taking notes as well. The initial rollout in terms of the curricular resources was in the K-5 space. We've been having conversations around 612 support as well. I'm not prepared just now to provide specifics around what that has looked like to date, but we are taking notes, and we do agree that we have to be able to serve all of our kids 612, particularly our students in Hank Aaron, and I see Doc is trying to jump in as well.
No, yeah, yeah. I think you're right. Well, so two things I want to speak to, just really briefly, that I think answer a bit of your question. So let's put a pin in Hank Aaron and say we need to lean in intentionally. I think in 6, 8, 9, 12. Let me come at it this way. Two things. Thing one is most of the board's investment was in people. Okay, so your readers or leaders, coaches that are on the ground, which in a perfect world, and I think it's true, like those are the highest and most skilled or as skilled people as you're going to get. So the more intentional we are and continue to be with training and coaching up those people, what we're trying to do is build that capacity right across the board, and they help to reinforce a good bit of what's there. The 6, 8, 9, 12 strategy, I think, has to continue to look a little bit different. Like there's this measurement of where students are from a literacy construct, but even once you measure where students are at the middle and high school, a lot of times our teachers, because they're content specific, and this is teachers anywhere, it's not just Atlanta, they haven't been trained in how to teach literacy. And so I think the strategy around how we support those teachers at the middle and high school level with that, and then also think about the human capital resource for them really as well, is going to be an important step to make sure that we can close as many of those gaps as we possibly can. So I think it's going to be a little bit of both and Hank Aaron's one that falls in that realm of needing the support and one which we have a chance and opportunity across the board to lean into from a middle and high standpoint.
Okay, and I just wanted to jump in on the Hank Aaron piece, but also on the 612 piece. Currently, our initiative has been focused on the K-5. And so in the listening sessions and in the early phases of the audit, we're seeing 612 and then the diversity of learners as something that was an opportunity to pull into the space. So over this next semester, the reason why we're extending the focus groups, the reason why we're doing the curriculum resources audits is because we're anticipating that there are some gaps in this early phase of our implementation. And so we'll need board support and community support with giving us ideas, giving us support with what would it look like for the 612 learner? What would it look like for a student at a Hank Aaron space? So that is why it's listed that way on the strategies and actions and board support plan, is because that's what we're anticipating based on our early phases of this audit.
Board Member Dr. Zeff.
Thank you. Thank you for this presentation. And thank you. I mean, this is the work, right? I mean, this is all hands on deck. I want to pick up on just two brief points. Dr. Butler, you talked about the literacy task force and talked about getting community input. Do we have sort of either state or national expertise as part of that committee and that task force? How are we encouraging? There's a lot of big thinkers in this space that can help guide this work. I know we're doing a lot of it on the ground. We have a lot of expertise within the system. How do we bring in that national expertise?
That is exactly the ask. The ask is, on the board part, really, how can you help us? Me being new to Atlanta, I'm on day 25. So being new to Atlanta, just really identifying who are those community leaders, who are those partners, where can we bring in the national experts? So those are the types of things that as we are going through uncovering what is and what isn't, being able to have that support readily available to just meet the need.
Awesome. Well, challenge accepted. We will provide you those names and provide you that level of visibility. Second question is around the board's made big investments in early childhood education through PACT and through preschool in our schools. You know, I see the data on third grade and it's remarkably stubborn. EOGs seem really, really hard to move. what can we do to, but we know that's not just a third grade, that's a summative experience. That just didn't happen in third grade, that happened in the 4 or 5 years before. What can we do to, or do we have any visibility into whether or not that investment is the right investment in early childhood? What can we do? Do we need to invest more? Do we need to put those dollars somewhere else? What's your guidance around that early childhood space?
You
say defer to Johnson.
26 days in, we're asking you for your guidance. Yes. So I'll let you jump in. I'm a firm believer, and I'll just give a philosophical versus. So last month we had the early learning presentation, and I know one of the things that we began to look at, and we'll get a chance to look even deeper at as we go forward, was how are third graders that are or were a part of our early learning experience performing in comparison to their counterparts, right? To me, if we're going to be outcomes focused, we've got to be outcomes focused, right? And so there's a real opportunity to make sure that, and look, I think it's important to, I want to dispel a myth about maybe outcomes focused. Like we're absolutely focused on outcomes. I am as focused and committed, and it's a part of the fabric of what you've got as superintendent. Like I am as committed to continuous improvement. So as much as I appreciate like astronomical gains year over year, I also appreciate people that can, with a level of intentionality, tell me what the data says, tell me that we didn't get it right, and tell me what they're doing in a targeted way to improve. Like that's as important an exercise as it is just consistent growth. So I think we've got a real opportunity there to make sure that what we're investing in is actually giving us the return on investment that we expect. I will say unequivocally, like I believe in high quality early education, and I think that I'm putting my parent hat on. I know what it did for mine, and so I think if we get it right, it has significant opportunity to yield tremendous dividends. And I think the real opportunity is to make sure that our students that don't get the level of exposure that some of our students do, that have, whose parents are, two-parent household or have the social connections, et cetera, to make sure when we talk about equity and access that we are really intentional and targeted with providing our students that aren't getting that level of exposure a really intentional, targeted opportunity. So I think, Board Member Zeff, to your point, we've got a real chance to make sure that what we're delivering in the early learning space is actually having impact on how our students are performing. And I can tell you what I think, but I want to be able to tell you factually what we know, and that's where the next steps from a data standpoint are.
Chair Mitchell, can I sneak one in? Or, I'm sorry, I thought we were coming back. Thought everyone was done.
Any questions to my right? Go ahead. Board Member Baldwin.
So you mentioned something about the 6th grade bump, and I just would like to hear more information about that. You mentioned that there was a bump that you saw, and it was across the board, and so I'm curious, what do you attribute that bump to? What happened in that 6th grade moment where we saw that bump, and is there something exciting that you could share?
I think the 6th grade teachers in Atlanta Public Schools are just phenomenal. And, no, I don't know. We've got, is Joe Austin in the room? Okay, he may have some data feedback, and obviously, Mr. Usher, if you got some additional context around that, I think it's an interesting data point, though.
Good afternoon. So when we look at 6th grade separately, we're not seeing a huge difference. I apologize. When we look at 6th grade differently, we're not seeing a huge difference between fall to fall. What we do see is that they have significantly more students projected for proficiency or higher than the other middle school grades. And I think that's what we need to ask ourselves is, what has 6th grade consistently been doing as a district? And in which schools are some of these gains happening? But it is clear that that projected proficiency is significantly higher than in 7th and 8th. And I think that's something we do need to look at. Could it be the professional learning that has been happening? Is there a consistency in that? A consistency possibly in using the MAP in a formative way to plan and inform instruction right down to the target level and to meet individual student needs. I think those are the questions we need to ask ourselves, and I'll defer to my colleagues as to the kind of strategies and professional learning communities that have been going on in 6th grade in particular.
So this is a projection from the most recent MAP.
Yes.
So again, not making a suggestion, but a curiosity, it could have been the 5th grade teachers possibly.
Yeah,
Okay.
oh, absolutely.
Or the
Absolutely.
4th, or the 3rd, or the 2nd, or the 1st, or.
Now last fall, it was still 6th grade. So again,
Okay.
possibly, so what, again, but that's another question. Is there something going on in 5th grade and that is helping to facilitate some movement
Yeah.
in that next grade level?
But and one of the other things I'd mention, and you don't ask you to speak to this, is we are or have requested from MWA, right, a standards based report that gives us a district view. So one of the things that's I think really important for teaching and learning planning as well as school leadership targeted support is to understand systemically where we are, and what we identified is we don't have said report available because of that's just not a natural report that that was being provided. So we've requested that, and I know we're probably 3 weeks, I think was the last update I got, away from having the ability at a district level to look at a standards view of how we're performing, so that when we start to look at planning professional learning and start to look at some of the resourcing and what we need to do, we're really informed with data. Now, we can get at that standards level through individual schools, but you imagine having, you have to go to each school and then try to pull it together versus having a kind of overarching standard view. So that's something we're working on that I think will also help us with situations such as this.
Excellent. And my other question is in the similar space, which is, tell me about any growth outliers. So it could be a school, it could be a grade band. Aside from 6th grade, when looking at the data, what growth outliers do you see, and what curiosities do they bring to mind?
So when we're talking about growth, that's something different than achievement or projected achievement. And it's not in this report, so I'm breaking a soft G rule.
Okay, so let me change it. Not growth. Achievement. I'll change it. I'll change it to when.
But actually, your question was actually excellent because
Okay,
the
keep it.
outlier is we are showing high growth. There's correlating data. Well, we may not see great gains in projected achievement. We are seeing a lot of growth when we're comparing students to their academic peers nationally. We've got to remember, these performance levels have a lot of scale scores. So you can be, if you're at the bottom of beginning learner or that level 1, you could have tremendously high growth and still not break out to the next level 2. And that's what achievement and projected achievement don't necessarily show, is that movement year to year. It can take years of effective teaching and hard work before we really see a student progress to another level. And so what's great about MAP is that they also have that growth measure. And I think that's appropriate to talk about now, because if you recall last spring, we saw a lot of stagnation in our projected achievement. However, we were confident we were going to see some improved milestone scores because we saw that growth. And we know MAP can be a very conservative measure because of the national norms. It's the most robust normative pool in the nation with regards to standardized testing. So that really is the other data point that, behind the scenes we talk about across departments and with schools individually, is that correlation of the growth and the achievement.
Thank you for the grace in allowing me to ask and answer that question. And I'd love to put into the parking lot the desire for tracking growth. Thank you.
It's been such a great conversation. And I piggyback on Board Member Zeff's questions around early learning. And are we getting the return on investment, particularly looking at, I know y'all highlighted first and third grade in the report, of the investments we're making in different programs with early learning with different partners. Like, that's extremely important. Not that that work isn't good, but what is it leading to? Is it the right way to spend our resources, which are limited? So I'm glad Board Member Zeff brought that up. Also, in talking about MAP, I still get questions about why we use MAP, when we have MAP testing, and I think it's really important to hear this conversation with what we're able to see because of MAP. Not that we need to go into explanation again, I'm just lifting it up. And then my question was around literacy instructional coaches. Like, I know that was highlighted as something that's working and talking about the rollout, and that's an investment by the district, and we have them, I assume, at every single school. Maybe some schools share, I don't know. But could you talk a little more about that investment, what we're seeing from it, and as we move forward in planning for the budget? Just, I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but more about, the impact we're seeing from literacy coaches.
I'm happy to jump in. I'll let you springboard. So we talking about with the principal last week, and the principal's exact words was that resource is a game changer.
Yep.
Now, this particular coach, I think we can steal. So she stole from the Atlanta Speech School, and so I think the things, is that stealing? Is that borrowing? What's that? That's okay. It's enticed, partnering. I'm gonna have speech. So
Yes, they partnering because they are a partner.
So I think the most important thing that I would note is what that particular principal stated, and what that principal stated is the value of the role is almost solely based on, and I'm paraphrasing, getting that hire right. Because if you hire somebody that knows what they're doing, that has the context and has the background, knows how to implement, it can exponentially help you build capacity across the building. And so Tommy, please add to that. But Mr. Usher, but I think what you see is that places that know they've got that hire right, you know what I mean? Like they're seeing really good for progression in kind of how things are going.
Yeah, and so I would echo Dr. Johnson's comments around the importance of the role. If you talk to principals across the organization, they would say the exact same thing. They're excited to have someone in the building who specifically is there to build the capacity of teachers specifically around reading by itself, and can go deep, and they understand reading strategies. They can identify all the different areas and components around literacy, and they simply focus on that. And the principals think that this is a game changer across the whole entire organization. So the impact right now is on teacher practice and coaching and developing the teacher through job-embedded professional development and coaching throughout the year.
That's extremely helpful. And, we'll be looking at the data. I mean, you're obviously hearing high impact examples from principals and then the implementation support, but looking at the data going forward. And I'm also hearing these are clearly people with the right kind of experience. This is not just, hiring someone who doesn't have this level of experience, and understanding the cost of that and how we have that for everyone. We talk about having the right resource based on our need. So I look forward to hearing, what more we collect in that area, in that space as we move forward. And the last thing, this one I'm going to highlight with administrative strategy and next steps, and I agree with the chair. Thank you for adding more to this page. So we need the board to partner with the community to gain input on revising the board goals and work collectively with the superintendent's team. So the need to reset our goals, and this is me talking, but narrow our focus, because when I look at these reports, I mean, it's really valuable information, especially the subgroup data, because we're looking at the overall goal growth. It's for 3 through 8 through the entire system, no matter where a kid is coming from. So what we're doing as we continue to improve and develop in this space and monitoring is really, like Dr. Johnson says, peeling back the layers. And this goal, looking at it, how we narrow in, now that we're really peeling back the layers to understand where we need to focus even more, so we can really align our resources with those needs. So thank you for highlighting that point, and I'm really looking forward to us digging deeper into that work as we go forward. And this conversation's been great to hear more about the data we should really be looking at, and talking about grades 6 through 12. I mean, that's really been highlighted as well. So I think that's all I have for now. Thank you all.
I wanted to ask, because there was a lot of conversation about, like, gain and how there can be gain within some of these different achievement levels, right? I had two questions. One was, when is milestones administrated in the fall?
You mean MAP?
Well, we were looking at milestone data for fall, correct?
No,
Milestones from last spring, we're looking at now.
Excuse me for misspeaking, but the MAP testing,
okay.
correctly?
Yes, sir.
So,
Yep.
so when is that done?
it is,
So for fall, it occurred towards those last 2 weeks of August. And then in winter, the window opens December 3rd. In 2 weeks of growth testing, and then we'll go into map reading fluency just for the K3s. And then I believe fifth grade, during the map growth window, also takes science in addition to the reading and the math.
And so our students, the MAP schedule is dictated by who? By us?
Yeah, so we use guidance from NWA MAP, but we also consult with our school test coordinators, with curriculum and instruction, with principals. So we want to administer fall MAP early to know where the students are, to help our teachers plan and inform instruction at that unit level. But then we need at least 9 instructional weeks minimum to get the most reliable data for the next administration. In addition to that, we want to make sure that we have new data for our teachers every 90 days for flexible grouping purposes, because the research says that with flexible grouping, your data points need to change at least every 90 days. So going into January, when our students come back from winter break, teachers will have new data to plan and inform instruction going into that next semester. And then in spring, early March is when we start the spring MAP testing. And again, it's been about 90 days. We've had just enough instructional weeks to see the data that will be most informative to us. And that tells us where those gaps are in those weeks before Georgia milestones. So our teachers have those weeks before Georgia milestones to use that MAP data and pinpoint individual student weakness, strength. For instance, there's a MAP report that shows if a student needs a topic introduced, reinforced, accelerated, or enriched. So it goes to that level of detail at individual student need. And so that is also a factor in that scheduling. But of course, with all the assessments that exist, both mandatory from the state, we have to find a balance with that at those various grade levels.
Could there be some opportunity for us to reflect on the efficacy of the achievement scores we get back on the fall MAP? I just summer learning loss is real, right? And so when you're coming back in August and 3 weeks in, you're taking MAP scores. I hear that you want to get baseline, but what I'm trying to say is I don't know that it is baseline. What I'm saying is kids haven't really quite gotten into the rhythm of getting back into school yet in the 3rd week of August. And I've heard from a lot of parents in my community specifically about, first off, there is a level of academic stress that students undergo when it comes to standardized testing. Some kids, it's just very real. And to be frank with you, in America, we over test. In fact, if testing got us better outcomes, America would be the number one academic outcome, have the number one academic outcomes in the world. Finland is ranked number one. They have one test. We have 25. We're ranked 52. So I have question about whether or not we should consider, have some conversations about when that map is happening. Again, that's administrative. It's not on us. But I also have questions about Lexile. Because with the bands, given what MAP shows us or Milestone show us, it splits it up into like 5. With Lexile, we really get to drill down more specifically on gain. And I think that gives us a better understanding of whether or not we're making strides with kids or not. As well as, let's be real, like standardized testing, if 85% of students score proficient or too well on the test, they're just gonna change the test anyway. So standardized tests are not necessarily designed for kids to be successful, to prove their proficiency in the first place. We should be focused on whether or not they can proficiently read, comprehend, and express what they learn. And that's what Lexile does.
Yes, absolutely. And MAP does have a very strong Lexile report as well. That's another reporting feature that MAP does have, and one of the reasons why we use it. And you're absolutely right about summer learning loss, and MAP does have a measure for that and does account for that as well.
Thank you.
So I just want to say thank you for this student outcome focused monitoring session, but I do want to remind us that we're not supposed to be giving administrative recommendations as a board. We have to leave it up to Dr. Johnson, but we can communicate differently on what we would like to see, but not give you all direction. So I just want to make sure we kind of temper that a little bit, but thank you. This concludes, hold on one second. All right, just gotta make sure, I'm taking his script. So I just want to make sure. So this concludes our work session items for today. Thank you everyone for your reports. Madam General Counsel, is there a reason for the board to retreat into executive session?
Yes, Madam Chair, the board needs to discuss legal, student discipline, and personnel matters.
So we do have a lot to discuss. With that being said, I would like to, well, let me just do this. Is there a motion to enter into executive session to discuss student discipline, personnel, legal, or real estate matters?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Vice Chair McDonald, second by Board Member Cynthia Briscoe Brown. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We'll see you soon.